Tjunction max, or TjMax, is the maximum temperature that your CPU is allowed to operate at. Internal control mechanisms will reduce the CPU frequency if the operating temperature is above the TjMax. The TjMax for Raptor Lake CPUs is 100 degrees Celsius. However, it can be manually increased to 115 degrees Celsius, though that's not recommended for long-term use. The maximum operating temperature for your CPU is a sensitive topic in the PC enthusiast space. In the next couple of minutes, I want to dispel 2 myths related to TjMax. 1. Running at TjMax is extremely dangerous. 2. Thermal throttling causes severe performance degradation. The first myth is that it's absolutely unsafe to run your processor at TjMax. I often get questions or comments when I show my Prime 95 results, where the CPU is typically running at the maximum allowed temperature. I get questions such as, is this really safe? Or I get told that it's extremely risky to run the processor at that temperature. The irony of those comments is that the operating temperature is the most conservative part of my overclocking guides. It's the one parameter that I don't run out of spec. For this 13900KS, Intel says I can run all cores at 5.6 GHz with 1.38 volt up to 100 degrees Celsius. And in my OC strategies, I increase the frequency and the voltage, but maintain the maximum of 100 degrees Celsius specification. The bottom line is that Intel puts its money where its mouth is. Intel makes a legal commitment by its 3-year warranty that your processor will perform according to its specification, which includes an operating temperature of up to 100 degrees Celsius. The second myth is that thermal throttling severely degrades your compute performance and must be avoided at all costs. While that may have been true a decade ago, the truth is that modern CPUs have very advanced performance maximizing technologies that are designed to maximize the performance in any scenario, including a scenario where your CPU is running at the maximum allowed temperature. The Raptor Lake TjMax thermal throttling mechanism is quite simple. When the operating temperature reaches TjMax, the CPU reduces the CPU turbo ratio until the temperature is below TjMax. In my overclocking strategies, I try leveraging those technologies to squeeze the most performance out of my system, before the thermal throttling point and at the thermal throttling point. That's why you will see me report on my Prime 95 overclocking results, and specifically the frequency, and how you will see me try and improve that frequency, as well as try and improve the performance in the normal benchmark workloads. On Raptor Lake processors, the user can configure the TjMax between 62 and 115 degrees Celsius. To illustrate the performance throttling, I tested the 13900KS with P cores at 5.8 GHz and E cores at 4.5 GHz in Cinebench R23. As you can see from the data, when TjMax is set to 62 degrees Celsius, you lose about 15% performance due to thermal throttling compared to when the TjMax is at its default of 100 degrees Celsius. To illustrate the frequency throttling behavior, I set the TjMax to 62 degrees Celsius and ran Cinebench R23. As you can see from the data, the CPU almost instantaneously responds to a temperature exceeding TjMax by reducing the P-core frequency from 5.8 GHz to 4.7 GHz and the E-core frequency from 4.5 to 3.7 GHz. As a side note, Asus also has its own TjMax style thermal throttling technology. You can use it by enabling the package temperature threshold option in the BIOS. This technology will monitor the Asus calibrated socket temperature and lower the Turbo Boost 2.0 PL1 limit if it exceeds the target temperature. Limiting the CPU power consumption will also reduce the operating temperature. While Asus technology works pretty well, it is less accurate and responsive than Intel's TjMax mechanism. To illustrate the frequency throttling behavior, I set TjMax to 115 degrees Celsius and the package temperature threshold to 62 degrees Celsius and ran Cinebench R23. As you can see from the data, the CPU responds much slower to the change in operating temperature than TjMax. At the start of the benchmark, the CPU temperature spikes up high, even above 100 degrees Celsius, before the ASUS technology aggressively adjusts the power limit to reduce the temperature. The temperature first drops significantly below the 62 degrees Celsius target, then gradually increases as the ASUS algorithm adjusts the power limit. The actual CPU package temperature with this setting is around 75 degrees Celsius. While I try to dispel the myth that running at the TjMax thermal throttling point will severely impact your system's performance, it does contain an element of truth. As we've seen from the data, when you run at the thermal throttling point, the performance will go down. So that's why it's so important to pair your powerful CPU with a cooling solution that's adequate so that you avoid thermal throttling too early and you can maximize the performance even at the thermal throttling point.